Welcome to this last breakout session for the day. This session is on eBay API fundamentals. I'm Rekha Patel and I have my colleague here, Sarika. We are part of the eBay developers technical support program. And this afternoon we are going to go over some of the basics to help you get started programming your eBay applications. So during the 45 minutes that we have here, we'll give you an introduction of the eBay APIs. We'll show you how you can get started and make your first call in about 5 minutes. We'll give you a couple of demos just to give you a feel of what the APIs look like, what the requests look like, what the responses look like, and this will help you program your application. And then we'll give you some concluding thoughts on what should be your next steps to help you create your eBay application. And we'll have some time reserved for question and answers at the end. And as we go along, if you do have questions, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll answer the questions along the way. We have a pretty small crowd, so we'll make it more interactive. So why even bother creating an eBay application? Well, because it's the largest e-commerce opportunity that you have, and we have 3 very well-defined monetization opportunities. First, you can join our eBay Partner Network program and drive traffic to eBay, and as a result of that, you can monetize your application. You can build tools and services for a very large eBay user community. eBay can create functionalities and applications that can serve a common denominator, if you will. But if users need specialized functionalities, then you can step in and create those features for them. And then we also have the Open eBay opportunity, where you can create your application and embed it right within the river. So as soon as users log into eBay, they see your application, they can subscribe to it, use it, and again, a monetization opportunity for you as a developer. So what kind of applications you can create? Well, the sky is the limit. You can create the traditional web-based and desktop applications, or you can create widgets, gadgets, plugins, mobile applications. Again, the sky is the limit. So you're just limited by your imagination. If you can make an HTTP request, you can essentially write an application, an eBay application. And like I mentioned, it's one of the largest e-commerce opportunities. We have 90 million active users, of which 27 are sellers. So a huge opportunity that you can tap into as a developer. What can you do with your eBay APIs? So you can pretty much do everything that you can do as a user on the site. You can list items, purchase items, you can get your transaction information, and therefore do fulfillment, order processing, and so on. You can manage communication between members, you can do account management, and it's pretty much everything that you can, almost everything that you can do on the site. And here's a link that will give you a quick overview of the product, and I'll go over that in a bit. So in terms of API offerings, what do we have? We have a huge comprehensive suite of products. So the first set is targeted more towards the seller, where we have a set of APIs called the trading APIs, large merchant services, best match, feedback, and product services. So essentially with the trading API, you can list items on eBay, get the transaction information, manage member-to-member communication. It's a synchronous mechanism of making API calls. You make a request, get your response, and you're done. The large merchant services is specifically targeted for merchants who have a fairly high volume of inventory or transactions. And here the difference between trading and large merchant services is that large merchant services is asynchronous and file-based. You'd upload your inventory of items that you want to list on eBay using a file. We'll take care of all the hard work of doing the parallelization for you, and you don't essentially have to have that huge infrastructure on your side. So we take away the hard part from you, and we do all the processing for you. With best match and feedback, you can help sellers improve their efficiency. So with these APIs, you can help sellers analyze how they're doing in terms of their items performing with the competition. You can help them analyze how they're doing, let's say in terms of which shipping service is working for them, not working for them, areas that they can improve on, opportunities that they can tap into. And the product service is a metadata service which gives you information for, let's say, if you were to list a motors item like a tire, and if you wanted to figure out which models would this tire fit, so you can use the product service for that. So it's a suite of APIs that you can use for creating selling applications. On the buy side, we have 3 APIs, the finding API, shopping, and merchandising. Finding helps you create experiences that help buyers search for items that are of specific interest to them. With the shopping API, you can get very detailed information about the items. And with the merchandising API, you can create a cross-selling or an upselling opportunity. So essentially, with these 3 APIs, you can create a very rich and compelling tailored shopping experience for your users. Complementing the APIs, we have platform notifications and client alerts. So if you wanted to be notified of an event right away, as soon as it happens, so let's say if an item sells and you want to be notified almost in real time, you can subscribe to platform notifications. Client alerts is a lightweight pull mechanism where you can make a JSON request and get the similar information. And like I mentioned, we have the Open eBay apps opportunity, where once you create the application, you can get it embedded right within eBay. So as soon as users log in, they can see your application on the Applications tab. You can, depending on your business model, you can have various subscription levels, or you can have a free offering, or whatever makes sense for your business. And if you want more details about the Open eBay apps opportunity, we have a booth in the exhibition area, so please stop by, and if you have any questions, or if you want to bounce off your ideas, you can stop by our booth. And finally, we have the research API. So this helps you get information on stats, on eBay stats. So for instance, if you wanted to find out what is the average selling price of a particular item in a particular category, you can use the research APIs. So with the research APIs, you can do very neat things like, what are the niche areas that I can list my items in? Or you can develop your pricing strategy. So you can do a number of things with the research API as well. So that's the suite of APIs that we have with which you can create very compelling applications. So now let's take a look at how can you get started using the APIs. So the first thing that you want to do is go to our Developers Program website, developer.ebay.com, and click on the Join Now button. And actually, I'll walk you through the process. Is the font size visible at the back? Or would you like me to increase it? It's okay? All right, so this is the website that you'd go to, developer.ebay.com. And the first thing that you want to do is click on the Join Now button. Looks like we are having some trouble with our site. But it's a fairly simple form that you fill out. You fill out your username and password that you want to use for the website, your name, your address, your phone number, and a real email address so that we can contact you in case we need to, if we need to talk to you about your application, or we need to get in touch with you. And once you join the program, what you need to do is get your key set. And what these key sets are is it's a combination of 3 entities. called the dev ID, app ID, and cert ID. Dev ID essentially identifies you as a developer, which is right here. And as a developer, you could have multiple key sets because you could have multiple applications. So it's a one-to-many relationship. The dev ID remains constant across your key sets. And then you have the app ID, which identifies your specific application. And finally, there is this entity called cert ID, which is pretty much, you can think of it as a password. So these are the three things that you need to start making your API calls. And to help you do your development, we have a sandbox environment, just as PayPal has their sandbox environment. You can build your application in the sandbox, test it out, try it out. There's no obligation for you. If you list items or if you purchase items, you don't really have to make any physical payments. Or if your item sells, you don't have to do the fulfillment. But it helps you do the simulation and try things out before you actually go live in production. So when you create your key set, you can create your key set for sandbox and as well as production. And these key sets are different in the sense that the sandbox key sets will not work in production and vice versa. Similarly, when you create users to actually list items or do purchases, the users in sandbox are totally separate from production. So they are like two very siloed environments. Information does not pass through between one or the other environment. So that's one thing that you want to keep in mind. And like I mentioned, the key sets are separate in the two environments. They don't work in the other environment. And you want to be careful with your key set. You don't want to expose it. Because this really is your gateway to making API calls. And essentially, you are responsible for all the calls that are made with your key set. So to be able to make API calls, we have two authentication mechanisms. The first mechanism is where you just have to pass in your app ID. And that's really all that you would need to be able to make an API call. And with this mechanism, you'd get information that is available publicly. So for instance, if you were to go up to eBay.com and if you were to search on items, you don't necessarily need to log in. You get information that's publicly available. So this mechanism gives you access to that kind of information. And the APIs that use this mechanism is the finding, shopping, merchandising, and research APIs. And then we have another mechanism where you essentially send in a user token. So what this represents is an authorization by a user to your application to make calls on their behalf. So for instance, let's say you wanted to list an item on eBay.com, you'd essentially have to log in. So it's behind, so whatever is behind the login follows this mechanism. And the rest of the APIs fall in that category. It's the second category where you need a user token. So now let's take a quick look at our most popular API, the finding API, which you would use for searching for items on eBay. So you can essentially search for items based on keywords, based on categories, or based on products. So you could use the API to say, help me find iPads or iPhones that are 3G or 3GS with 16 GB memory and so on. Or you could say, help me find items that are in a specific domain or in a specific category, which would be like, say, electronics or MP3 players or so on. Or you could specify a product ID, like a UPC code or the equivalent in eBay terms, which is the EPID, eBay product ID. And you can help find items for your buyers. So you can use the finding APIs to build applications essentially for browsers or for mobile or for any technology that can make an HTTP request. The formats that you can use are XML, SOAP, name value pairs, or JSON. So it's a very flexible system. And the protocols that you can use are HTTP GET or POST. Typically, when buyers go to eBay, the way they start the search is by first putting in a few keywords, and then let's say if they were searching for something that was very popular, which is likely to give them tons of results, like in this case, a camera, the next thing that the buyers start looking at is filters, which we have on the left-hand side there, which says refine search. I'm not sure if it's visible at the back. But essentially, you can narrow down your results by clicking on a specific category by saying, let's say, I'm looking for items in the camera and photo category. And then you can start filtering on certain aspects like the megapixels or the zoom or the type of camera. And finally, you would end up with a smaller, more manageable result set, which is probably what you want to display to your buyer when you build your application. So you can use the finding APIs to build a very similar experience where you can start very broad and maybe help your buyers narrow down to their exact requirements. Now, eBay has multiple websites. Like we have a website specifically for US, for UK, Germany, France, and so on. And with the finding APIs, just as you can go to the targeted websites, you can make your finding API request to those targeted websites. So you can say, I want to fire a query which is targeted to eBay UK or maybe eBay Germany. And you do that by specifying the site that you want to search on. And like I mentioned, you can, apart from the keyword search, you can narrow your results using aspects and filters. And if you wanted to narrow your results further down, you can make use of the concept of pagination, where you can say, give me 5 entries per page or give me 50 entries per page. And you can also sort your results just as you can do it on the site. So it's very similar to the experience that you see on the site. So I'll give you a quick demo of the finding API. On our website, we have this tool called the API test tool. So if you go to developer.ebay.com, you'll see it right here under quick links. There is this tool called API test tool, which helps you make the API calls without you actually having to write code to do that. So you can try it out, see if this is the call that works for you, and then you can start your coding. So the first thing that you want to do is select your environment. Are you going against sandbox or production? Now, one tip that you might want to keep in mind is that if you're creating shopping experiences where you're just getting information, you're not actually writing information, in the sense you're not listing items or you're not creating transactions, then it's all right to go to production straight away rather than trying it out on sandbox. And the benefit of that is you're likely to get a much richer set of inventory rather than on the sandbox. So in this case, I'll go to production because I'm going to make a finding API call. And it automatically populates my key set. And then from the drop-down for select an API, I can select finding or shopping or whatever else I want to try out. So in this case, I'll select finding. Then it gives me a template for all the API calls that I can make within that set. So what I'll do is I'll choose Find Items Advanced. It's one of our most popular and most comprehensive calls. It has very advanced filtering capabilities, like we saw, the aspect filtering. And in terms of templates, I can select a full generic template or a partial pre-filled template. So in this case, since we just want to see how the call works and what my result set look like, I'll select a partial pre-filled template. And if I had any questions about the input or the output or how the API itself works, I can click on this link here which says documentation. And it takes me right to the call reference for the documentation, where it shows me all the inputs for the call, all the outputs it's likely to return. I also have some sample code, change history, which is very beneficial if especially if you've built your application a while back and now you want to see what is it that has changed in the APIs, what features you can take advantage of. And apart from the call reference, we also have a user's guide, which gives you information about the API, the finding API. And then it gives you technical information about how would you make your call. And then we also have some tutorials. So it's very handy to have this available when you're actually doing your coding. Then you can select the version with which you want to make your calls and the site against which you want to make the call. On the right-hand side, you'd see the request template. So here in this case, it's going against category, and I can also introduce a keyword and say, I want to search for cannons. And I'll say submit. So if my request is successful, the tool tells me right here where it says the ACK, which is a element of the response, and it tells me if it's successful or not. And then if it is successful, then it gives me search results and it gives me the item information. So here I have the item ID, the title, it also has the image for the item. So if I were to create an application which actually displays the item's image and item information, I can grab all of this and display it in my application. So you can try this out before you actually start coding your application. All right, next Sarika will take you through the trading APIs.
Thank you, Rekha. But before we look at the trading API, I want all of you to think about what eBay sellers have to do on a day-to-day basis. As an eBay seller, firstly, you need to bring your inventory on the site. So you list items on ebay.com. You have to constantly, if you want to be competitive, you're constantly doing some price optimization. You have to keep your inventory in sync with your database at eBay. And then you also want to be pulling in order information on a real-time basis frequently to keep track of what are the incoming sales transactions. Do order fulfillment, inform the buyer that you've shipped the items. And while you're doing all this, you also need to communicate with your buyers if they have questions or if for any reason you get into disputes. So with this background, wouldn't it be nice to have something that would allow sellers to do this in an automated fashion, in a simplified fashion? Sellers' lives would be much easier. And so enter Trading API. The Trading API allows sellers to do pretty much everything that covers selling and post-sales management. So listing items on the site, managing their inventory, doing order fulfillment, uploading shipment information, and managing communication with their prospective buyers or existing buyers. And a trading API call is, you could either submit XML calls or SOAP calls made over HTTPS post. Now, this is what a typical trading API application will look like. You have an app ID, which is identifying your application, and then your application could be servicing one or more sellers. So the important thing to sort of remember, or the key takeaway from this slide, is that the app ID, your application, is different from an eBay user. They're two distinct entities, and your application is only making calls on behalf of these eBay users. So I'm sure the next question in your mind is, well, how does the app ID get this power? What authenticates the application? And the answer is a user token. A user token is a string that provides your application with the authentication to grant, to access data on behalf of an eBay user, to retrieve data on behalf of an eBay user, or even to write data on behalf of an eBay user. For security reasons, it has a limited lifetime of 18 months. And it's a alphanumeric string, which is unique to your application and to a specific eBay user. Any questions so far? Okay. So now let's look at how to make a trading API call. So you need an app ID. You need a user on whose behalf you're performing that call. And that's it. You make the call. So since I want to operate in the sandbox environment, and Rekha told us how sandbox and production are different environments, we'll need to first create a sandbox user, which is different from a production user, generate a user token for that sandbox user, which means obtain the authentication to perform the action on behalf of the sandbox user, and then we can make our first API call. So the snapshot shows some tools that are embedded within the developers program website for you to be able to do these things. So going to the developers program website, I'm going to show you exactly where the tools are and how you can use them. So if you are at developer.ebay.com, you'll see a resources tab, and if you go all the way, I'll just click on it, but if you go all the way to the bottom, there is a link for tools, development tools. And you'll see a whole bunch of tools here, but for the purpose of this exercise, the one tool that I wanted to talk about is the sandbox user registration tool. This tool allows you to easily and quickly create sandbox users. So let's say you're building a selling application and you want to test out this selling application. So you need a user that represents a seller and a user that represents the buyer. Use this tool to create the seller and the buyer. So it's a simple web form. You just need to fill in whatever fields are required, leave the defaults as is, and then you'll be good. The next tool that I wanted to talk about is the user token tool. So now let's say you've created the user and you want to obtain the authentication token for the user. So you would go to the development tools and click on the user token tool. Here you would need to select the environment, whether you're creating a token for a sandbox user or a production user, and then your key set will get populated, and pretty much then it'll direct the user to the sign-in flow, have the user grant your application access, and come back, redirect with a user token. I'm not going to take you through the actual creation process for all these things, but we'll jump back to the API test tool, and we'll make a simple trading API call. And for a brief moment, I want to take you to the eBay website to show you what equivalent action I'm going to perform using the API. So let's say I'm searching for iPods. I'm in the market shopping for an iPod. And there's maybe I look at this auction item and I think it's a good price, but I'm not ready to buy it yet. I just want to watch it. So you have this functionality of adding an item to your watch list. And I'm going to make an equivalent API call that will allow you to replicate this functionality. So I'm going back to the test tool. But first I need to identify the item that I'm interested in. So I'll go to the sandbox website. actually your call is gone. So. So this is the item. I'll just copy the item number because that's a mandatory field that the call requires. And now I'm going to operate in the sandbox environment. So I select Trading API. And then I'm going to be performing this action on behalf of a sandbox user DTS1. So the user token, as you see, is automatically populated because it was saved in the account. And then I selected the API call add to watch list. Then say all fields. So I'm going to collapse this bar because we've done making our selections in that panel. So it's a very simple call. All you need to say is this is the item that I'm interested in, and this is the item that I want to add to my watch list. And I always put warning level high so that if I'm making any mistakes, the API response will have that. Woohoo, I just added an item to my watch list. So if I go back to Sandbox and log in as the user, I will be able to see the item added to my watch list. So a few tips that I would like to give if you're operating, if you're going to start using the API. Change in site ID changes information. So if you're retrieving metadata, you want to be, if you're retrieving, say, shipping details for the US site, you want to make sure that you're passing you're making requests against the US site and not the UK site. So site ID is a very, very important parameter that you want to be careful about. Values in the API response depend on the version that you pass in. Private information is only returned with the user's token. And one tip that I mentioned while I was doing the demo is use the warning level of high to be able to detect input errors early on. Request version is honored, but response version always corresponds to the latest API version. And the date time values that the APIs take or respond are always in GMT. All right, now let's look at some best practices. If you're going to be building your application with our APIs, first step is obviously choosing the API. One rule of thumb is keep it simple. Pick the API that gives you exactly the information that you need and is the least complicated. Ask for only as much data as you need. That will help not only your application's performance, but it will provide a good experience to users who are using your application. So ask for only as much data as you need. Implement retries for errors that come back as eBay server errors or network errors. But if your application gets an application error, which means there was something fundamentally wrong with your request, then don't implement retries. Fix the error first and then retry. Use the sandbox. It's an excellent test environment. So if you're building selling applications, by all means, first build the application and test it out in sandbox so that once you release it in production, it's production quality. Implement logging. It's a great troubleshooting aid. So implement logging in your application. If you're building a selling application, make sure you have the ability to renew tokens before they expire. and plan to update your application at least once in 6 months, because we deprecate the lowest level of API once every 6 months. So that's all I had. To sum it up, what are the next steps for you? Register on developer.ebay.com, generate your key sets for sandbox and production environment, get those user tokens for your users, identify the API calls to use, try out the calls, use our API test tool, or if you're already comfortable, build a test app, build your application, test it, release it, and start making money. This is a quick link for your reference. If you, once you're ready to go live, what are the things, a quick checklist for you to refer to when you're ready to go live. And the next slides, I won't take too much of your time, but the next slides for your reference are just links to resources on the website. Remember, it's all in one place, developer.ebay.com, our documentation, knowledge base, forums, and if you need immediate support, developer support is there to help you. So by all means, make use of all these resources. We would love to help you. Any questions? Yes. He's getting a mic, so you want to wait for that.
Oh. Can you give any overview of some of the more complicated processes where it's like a two-way, to actually list an item where you have to send something, get a response, like item specifics, and that seemed like it was very complicated before. Is it still
specifically talking about the listing piece or the selling?
I mean, basically where the process is more than just one API call and a response. It's a whole sequence of things back and forth to actually get an item listed, where you have to submit a category and then get back the item specifics for that category.
So there's some metadata information that you want to pull in advance. Like when you list an item, what are the things that you need to supply? You need to specify the category ID, the shipping services that you're going to use, and all this information you will pull using the APIs beforehand. And when you actually make the listing request, you're going to feed in all this information and just wait for the response or get the response immediately depending on what API call you're using. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, just to add to what Sarika said, a lot of your information is kind of static, in the sense that, let's say if you wanted to get a list of all your shipping services for a specific site, then they're fairly static. But yes, you do need to send it in every request. Similarly with your category hierarchy. And we've also made an attempt to simplify the listing process itself. So for instance, if you're listing items against eBay catalogs, you could actually send in the MPN and the brand, and you don't necessarily have to send in the eBay category ID. Similarly, if you had the eBay product ID, EPID, then again, you don't need to send in the category ID or the product description. We'll pick it up automatically for you and list for you. In terms of item specifics, yes, they were very complicated in the sense they were ID based. Let's say if you wanted to list a camera, then in order to specify megapixels, you'd send in a specific attribute ID and a value ID and so on. So we've tried to simplify that as well. Now about 90% of the categories take in name value pairs, where you send in your own name for the attribute and the value. We do give you a set of recommendations, but you could send in your own. So we've come a long way in that sense.
I haven't looked at this in a long time, but I remember it was something where you had to. I haven't looked at this a long time, but it used to be something where you had a bunch of HTML and CSS you were supposed to embed directly in your interface and didn't really have any control over. Has that changed?
Right, so that was the old ID-based attribute system. Yeah, so like I said, about 90 to 92%, I believe, of the categories have been migrated to custom item specifics, where you don't have to render the HTML and select your attributes from that HTML form, where you didn't have too much control over that form. So yeah, we're moving away from that system, and I guess by the mid or sometime in Q3 of 2011, most of the categories should be migrated over.
Okay, we can take one last.
Are you familiar with eBay File Exchange?
A little bit.
Okay, I'm just wondering if is that being eliminated as these come in more and more, do you know, or is that still going to be available? It's very highly unsupported.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
There's very little support for File Exchange that I could ever find. Is it being eliminated? Is that something that they don't really see a future for?
It's not being eliminated, but yeah, it's a separate tool that essentially leverages the APIs.
Makes them easier to use.
Yeah, and
okay.
Do you want to add anything to it?
Yeah, if you had any specific issues with File Exchange, maybe we can talk after the session and see if we can help address those issues for you. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.